So this week saw the launch of Uldir, the first raid in the Battle for Azeroth, and after clearing it on normal and partway through heroic, I just wanted to kind of share my initial opinions on the raid. So first up, let's just talk about the scenery for this raid. I actually like it, however I am worried it's going to get a little bit bland. It feels like every single first tier kind of just has the same palette all the way through. Yes, the last two bosses go from, you go from having the golds and browns into having grays and blacks, but overall it's fairly neutral palette, nothing really popping with color or anything. Not that that's anything bad, but it might get a little bit hard to look at as we progress through it, maybe a month or two from now. But overall it looks good. It looks like what it's supposed to look like. I think that's part of the main good part of it, is the fact that it looks that you would expect it to look like as a Titan facility. So I think it definitely fits the theme there fairly well. It's mainly just the colors that I really have any kind of issue with. But we do get red back, so it kind of has that red theme from Emerald Nightmare. Vectis is very red. There's a lot of red mechanics. So if you wanted a little bit of color, you got the red. But anyway, let's actually talk about the bosses. So the first boss is Talaq. I thought this was a very good start to a raid. It's a very straightforward boss with very obvious mechanics that you mainly just have to avoid standing and stuff or getting hit by things and then dropping off stuff on the ground that leaves a little void zone behind you. And the reason why I think this is such a good first boss is that these are all mechanics that pretty much everyone will have seen before in some form or fashion at some point in time. One of the main bosses in this expansion that kind of reminds me of is Harlan Sweet at the end of Freehold. I believe that's his name. He has two of those similar mechanics of an ad that you gotta kill before it reaches something or you. There's ads that do that in this as well, in Talaq, as well as the dropping off of these little void zone. It's fire in Freehold and it's blood in Talaq's thing. So both of these mechanics are things we've seen not only like throughout the history of WoW, but also in this expansion already in a dungeon, which is something that everyone is probably done by now on some difficulty. So I feel like this is a really good, those are like the two main mechanics, at least for part of the fight. So I feel like that's a really good starter set of mechanics. There's also the dodge. You got to dodge the cudgel that clears up the bloods. So that's a little extra thing to think about as well. But overall, it's fairly simple and straightforward. Not too much outside the box thinking that you have to worry about, at least on normal and heroic. So overall, I think this is a great first boss. Most people should be able to get it down fairly easy as long as you understand the mechanics. The second boss is Mother. Now, I think it's kind of funny that they threw a boss like this as the second boss, as kind of like a gatekeeper boss right away. But I think that's kind of part of the theme that Blizzard's going for, is they want, even on normal, for there to be a little bit more coordination and communication in order to get these things done. So what we had to do, we brought 29 people to our normal raid, and I think it was 27 people for our heroic raid for this. And it did take a good amount of coordination just to make sure we weren't, wiping the raid going through the barrier, as that does a lot of damage. The more people who go through it, it does a set amount of damage every time someone goes through it, and the amount of people who go through it summons an amount of ads based on who went through, and those ads have something that needs to be interrupted. They can be stunned as well, they can be CC'd and such, but so you want to kind of have a set of people who are good at interrupting and can handle a large group or even a small group, just depends on your setup, and make sure that those casts do not go off. Interesting mechanic. I like the implementation of it. I actually really like it as a whole. Like, looking at it from a mechanic standpoint, I actually like it. The only problem is if you're someone who really likes to DPS, like if you're all about parses and numbers and things like this, if you're one of the first people to cross the barrier, you can't hit the boss anymore, and that's going to tank your damage. But as long as what you're going for is either gear or just to kill bosses and stuff like that, then that's really not that big of a deal. But so from a mechanical perspective, I really like it. I do see that I'm sure there'll be some people complaining about how you can't hit the boss through the barrier, but that's overall not really important. It's all about, can you do the mechanics and can you kill the boss? So overall, I really like this fight. There's a lot of other little small things thrown in there. The wind that knocks you into the fire, or the laser beams, just little small things you have to dodge and deal with. Overall, kind of, again, things we've seen before, kind of thrown together with things we haven't. Another good boss. I really like this boss as well. Even if it can be a little bit annoying at times, especially if you enjoy the DPS side of things and parsing well. But even then, I don't feel like it's that bad, as once you get to the last side of the room, I believe you get a damage bonus as well. I can't fully remember. Anyway, it didn't seem to be that big of a deal, but that was an interesting boss. I like the idea of the barrier mechanic and stuff like that. So yeah, good second boss. The third boss that we did is Fetid Devourer. That's a really hard word to say. Anyway, that's the third boss that we did. This is as close as we're probably going to get to a patchwork fight. I guess Vectis could be kind of considered that a little bit, but the knockback is the main thing that takes you off of the boss. It has, again, really simple mechanics. There's a knockback, there's a frontal cone that he'll turn around and use towards a direction, and then there are the egg sacs, or whatever you want to call them, that spawn in the little alcoves of the room. Interesting fight on the way that it kind of recovers health if it can get to the egg and eat it. So there's that, but overall, at least on normal, fairly easy. On heroic, it was a little bit more challenging, just in the sense of you really have to make sure that the eggs were getting killed quick enough. That was one of the things I think we were struggling with, as well as they do the boss does a ton of tank damage, and that was one thing that we were struggling with as well at first. But once we finally kind of got everything situated, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It was one of those boss kills where at the end everyone was like, why did we even wipe on that once? So yeah, at least in heroic. So on normal, fairly straightforward, just basically dodging stuff, kind of positioning yourself in a way where you're not getting knocked back too far. I think that was kind of an interesting idea, is kind of using the room's geography to place yourself up against the wall, or so you won't get knocked back too far away, or something like that. Interesting idea. It's not something that you see a lot in raids and stuff like that, so I thought that was a welcome addition. Overall, fairly simplistic fight, not too much to talk about there. The next boss that we did was Vectis, and this was very different between normal and heroic for our group. For normal, it was very easy. You just attack the boss. When the ad comes up, you kill the ad, and then you go back to the boss, and that was pretty much it. Then you soak the stuff in the second phase. If you don't, then you get the ad, but that's fairly easy. Just everyone kind of grabs something to soak, and that's pretty much it. On heroic, though, it felt like you really had to pay attention to an ability called a Mega Vector. And essentially, this is a dot that gets applied to you, and after it goes off, it jumps to someone else. Now, what can happen with this is that if everyone is stacked, then they can all jump on one person, or two of them can jump on one person and essentially just eliminate them. Makes it extremely hard for the healers, and as you start to lose people, it's really easy for it to just jump around and start picking you off. So randomly, you might not have any problem with it, or randomly, you might have all the problems with it. So what we eventually did is have to divide it up into groups so that we would only have one Omega Vector in each group. So since we had a large group for our heroic run, we had 27 people, we got 3 Omega Vectors at once. So we had to have 3 different groups, each one having an Omega Vector in it. So if we were all already separated and maybe 2 got in the same group, we had to communicate which one was going to run to the other group that didn't have an Omega Vector, and then handle it normally from there. So a little bit more communication with that. Once we figured that out, it was fairly easy to deal with, and everything just kind of fell over from there, and everything else was mainly the same. But that was kind of an interesting first little, like, oh, we really got to communicate this a little bit better. And that, it persists through the second phase as well, so those players have to stay together when we're soaking the things in the second phase. So again, that's something else that I believe will probably be easier to coordinate with less people. But yeah, interesting mechanic, kind of like it. It was kind of the only thing that was really difficult about this boss, but it did require some communication, so kind of interesting. A little bit more on the boring side, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of the whole fight itself. Everything kind of revolved around a Mega Vector. The fight only has those 2 phases that it just goes back and forth between. But yeah, that one mechanic was interesting. So, not the worst fight in the world. I can't wait to see what it's going to look like on Mythic. So that brings us to the 5th boss of the raid, which is Zek'Voz. So far, I think this might be my favorite boss of the raid. It definitely contends with G'huun, and it's basically just because it's just all over the place with what is in it. There's a lot of cool, like, little lore things. I'm not going to give anything away with that, but just, you know, if you're doing this, whenever you do it, make sure you look in the background, you know, pay attention to what's going on in the back of the room, maybe pay attention to the ability names. It might give you some clues as to what's kind of happening here. So kind of interesting stuff, but also just kind of the mechanics. You've got something that you need to take out of the raid and drop off. You have to do basically a safety dance with these circles that will appear on the ground, and there will be one ring that you can stand in, and the rest of them you will die essentially if you stand in them when they go off. Really, it's not like that's a hard mechanic, but it's just one more thing to have on top of this while everything else is going on as well. You have like a little element of ad cleave that you want to kill pretty quickly, and then you've got an element of 3 ads that will spawn that are too far away to be cleaved. They need to be either hard CC'd or constantly interrupted. There's just a lot going on. Too much for me to actually like kind of go through every single mechanic, but it is just kind of a hodgepodge of different mechanics all thrown together. Can you live through it all? Can you dodge them? Are you aware when they're coming out? There's an ability that basically targets someone in your group when you're in a time where you're supposed to kind of all be mainly stacked together, or at least loosely stacked. And if that goes off when they're center of the raid, it will basically wipe out that person and everyone around them. So it's this constant kind of like in and out moving. Like, it's not a lot of movement. It's a lot of small movements. But there's a lot to be had with optimizing your position, and that's something that I really like in raids, is like how best can I optimize my movement, especially as someone who's playing an elemental shaman. It's all about, you know, how little motion you can do as a turret. You can't really do too much on the run. Sure, you've got like frost shock and whatnot, but it's still a DPS loss over just casting normally. So like just a lot of little optimizations you can do on a class by class basis, as well as just a lot of random kind of, in my opinion, I think these are just kind of a fun group of mechanics. So another one that I'm looking forward to on Mythic. So really interesting boss. Pay attention to the background. Which brings us to Zool, which is a very ad-heavy fight. There's a lot of cleave, there's a lot of priority ads that need to be nuked down as well, and overall, the first phase of this, which is where the ads are really prevalent in, was really fun just from a standpoint if you really like doing damage. Definitely the best fight for Elemental, a lot of cleave to be had there. Not too much in the way of mechanics that I noticed on normal. We did not get to this one on heroic for this week. Ran out of time right as we were getting to it. So let me know what you guys think about the difference between this one on heroic and normal, as well as for all of them for that matter. Let me know what you guys think as well for any of these fights, but especially for these last 3 on heroic, since we did not get to them. The second half of this fight was very hectic in terms of there was a lot of healing that was needed. There was the mind controls or the fears, I should say, that were kind of pushing you towards the edge. A lot of little fun things there, things to avoid and stuff like that. But overall, on normal, not too much to worry about. It was mainly just a tank and spank, at least from my perspective, from what I was able to see in my first impression of it. Can't wait to see how it is on Heroic and Mythic. I guess we'll see when we get there. Let me know what you guys think about this one on Heroic, if it does vary greatly. Next up, we have Mythrax. So this is the fight where you start off in the most weird way possible, which is jumping in through the ceiling, taking the fall damage, and starting on the boss. Now, you don't take like a full fall damage, but it is kind of an interesting way to start the fight. I thought that was really interesting, kind of just a different approach overall. So that was kind of cool, and which then starts a fight that is really all over the place and hectic. So that's a lot of fun. So you've got a lot of ads that are coming up. You've got these balls of mind control, these mind control balls that will spawn on top of people, and you basically have to target them and hit them to knock them out. You can obviously use knockbacks like Typhoon or Thunderstorm to knock them out as well. As well as you've got a stacking debuff on you that you can clear with these green orbs that keep spawning. Again, didn't do this one on heroic yet. We killed this one fairly quickly, and basically it was just kill things as they came up, kill the boss, get people out of mind control as fast as possible, especially the tanks and whatnot, and make sure that if you wipe, make sure that people aren't still mind controlled, because it takes forever for Mythrax to reset right now. That's something that will be fixed, but we did wait for about 2 minutes while people were still mind controlled and everyone else had wiped. Kind of a little funny thing there that happened. Eventually it does reset though. But overall, this fight was really hectic. It was really hard for me to kind of see what's going on. I'll have to dissect my own video at a later point, as well as probably just pay more attention next week as we start more pushing this one into heroic as well. So that's just kind of my observation on it so far. And finally, the Mac Daddy of the raid, we have G'huun. So this one is the most pug unfriendly boss I've ever seen put into the game. I would just love to watch someone try to pug this, at least in like the normal types of pugs where no one's coordinated, especially with larger groups. It's just kind of a really confusing fight. So let's talk about some of the mechanics that were really interesting. Was the running of the orbs on either side of the encounter area. So basically what you want to do with your groups is you split up your groups into multiples of either 2 or 3 or 1 if you're an arm, or if you're a warrior that has heroic leap. And you're basically trying to run these orbs from one end of the room to the other. However, after a couple seconds, you'll begin to start being slowed, or actually you'll begin to get slowed right away, and after a couple seconds, you'll be rooted and have to throw that orb to someone else, and they'll have to carry it the rest of the way. But again, if you're an arms warrior, you can do it with a lock portal, a heroic leap, and with the talent for the heroic leap, you should be able to get there on your own. That's probably, I think, the only class that can do it on their own, but most classes it takes at least 2 people to do, as well as a healer, so to keep you guys alive while you're up there as well. Not like a lot of damage going out specifically, just the normal AoE from the room can be a little bit much, as we found out. So for us, it took, I think it was 14 people. I'm not looking at the video right now, but you'll see the angry assignments that we have in the top left that I have posted. It definitely takes a little bit of coordination. So I found that really fun. Once we got that down, like once we figured out our groups, when we were going, who we were going with, it was really easy to kind of formulate that in a way that it just started making sense. Like I was always throwing my orb to the same person every single time, and he was able to kind of read off of me, I was able to read off of him, and even within like the first 3 attempts of this one, once we got it down, it already felt really smooth. Like we knew what each person was thinking. I knew exactly where to throw the orb. He picked it up immediately, double blinked to the receptacle, and it was done. So I think that's a really interesting mechanic. I enjoyed doing it. I think there's a lot to be had as well moving forward into Heroic and Mythic, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that is on those difficulties as well. I believe it's on Mythic that you have to do them both at the same time, so that'll also be interesting. I don't think that's necessarily too much more difficult than doing them one at a time, but I guess I'll see, you know. As far as G'huun himself, as well as that first part, there's just a lot of add cleave. You want to be interrupting as much as possible. There's a buff that you can get from the Dark Young, the most weird name for an ad I've ever heard in a raid, but whatever. You can stand in that. It does damage to you, but it also gives you a damage bonus. Kind of cool there. And then once you get to actually fighting G'huun, things kind of start slowing down a little bit. You've got one ad to worry about that is from Blood Feast, and this is kind of an interesting mechanic as well, is that everyone has these stacking debuffs, and in order to clear these debuffs, you have to stand in this Blood Feast. Now, depending on how many debuffs are absorbed, that's how powerful the ad will be. So you can't always have everyone clearing each time, otherwise the ad will just get too big. But you'll eventually have to have like a giant ad, which you're going to want to time with your last orb to be able to nuke it down as quickly as possible, as well as stun it. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on there. I thought that was interesting. And then finally in the last phase, which kind of, in my opinion, kind of starts right after you kill the giant ad that you're going to get, you've got to nuke him down to 20%. The ceiling falls. He has an energy bar that will reach to a disorient, as well as you're just constantly dodging things on the ground, taking the things that get cast on you out of the raid. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. I don't have to list every mechanic, I guess, but I found it really enjoyable. It's not like the super longest of last bosses. At least it wasn't on heroic, or at least on normal. So I'm sure it'll get longer as the difficulty increases. I actually really enjoyed this fight. This and Zek'Voz. Am I saying it right? Zek'Voz? Zek'Voz? I don't know. Whatever, I've already said it once. It's so hard for me to remember that name. Anyway, point being, those are probably my two favorites in the raid, at least from what I've seen on normal and heroic. So that's kind of what I think. I think overall, I think it's a really interesting raid. There's a lot to be interested about, a lot to be excited about moving into the higher difficulties. I think overall this is definitely a better raid than Emerald Nightmare. I was able to clear that one myself in pugs. I didn't have a guild at the time. I was able to clear Emerald Nightmare in a pug on the second week. I know a lot of people were able to do heroic on the first week. I did it in the second week, sue me. But yeah, so like the difference in like the amount of coordination needed between Emerald Nightmare and this one feels night and day. So I'm really enjoying that. It feels good. It feels good to raid again for me personally. Obviously, that's definitely a bias that's going to color my opinion, but I still feel like this is definitely a better raid than the Emerald Nightmare. Just a little bit more coordination, or I should say a lot more coordination than it took to clear heroic in that. So overall, I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a great raid. I think it's a great first start. I am worried a little bit about the pug scene just because of the fact that that has grown so much recently. I think, personally, this might actually be Blizzard trying to push people more back into guilds. It hasn't worked in the past as much as I would want it to. I would love it if like raiding was a little bit more widespread, at least in more guilds and coordinated groups. But that's just what would be nice for me, helping the scene and helping more guilds grow and stuff like that, more people in the community. That's just me personally. I don't know how that's going to go, if that's actually Blizzard's plan or not. It might blow up in their face. What do you guys think? What do you guys think who have done this in pugs? How hard has it been for you? You know, do you think it's doable? Do you think it'll happen with a couple weeks of gear, or do you think that people are just going to refuse to learn the mechanics and it'll just be a nightmare to try to do this on normal or even heroic once the gear gets to that point? What do you guys think? And for those of you who have already cleared, or in my situation who's mostly cleared through heroic, what do you guys think about the raid? Are you guys excited about Mythic? I know that I am personally, but as I've said before, very biased. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Really excited moving forward and into the next raid, into the rest of the expansion. So far, it's been a great expansion for me. I know a lot of people are talking about this like it's a filler expansion, but the whole reason why I haven't been putting out too many videos recently is because of the fact that I've been literally just farming and doing all this stuff, dungeons, island expeditions, world quests, PvP even, just to try to get gear. There's been the reputations and whatnot. Oh my god, there's so much to do right now. You know, mythic pluses, like trying to work your way up to a 10. Got to an 8 last night, you know, trying to push a little bit harder on that as well. So there's just so much to be done right now if you're raiding. I do sympathize with anyone who's not. In Legion last expansion, I was fairly casual and still had a lot to do. I wonder if that's still the same. Let me know what you guys think. I'm very curious to what you guys think about Uldir, as well as the rest of the expansion as a whole right now, because I, for one, am really enjoying it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.